Hello and welcome to this LP online Q&A. We're delighted to be able to share with you a bit of insight into what it's like to be a bass player in the LPO. And we'd really love to hear from you, so please do get in touch with us via social media using the hashtag LPOnline. My name's Laura and I'm the most recent addition to the bass section. I joined in February this year, but I did freelance with the LPO a bit before joining. I'm going to pass you on to my desk partner now.
Oh, hello, I'm Tom Walley. I joined the orchestra in 2018. I share a desk with Laura Murphy. And like Laura, I was a freelance player for quite a few years with the orchestra beforehand. Hugh?
Hey, I'm Hugh Kluger and I joined the orchestra in 2018. I came from Australia originally, and so I'd never played with the LPO before, and that's what I do now. I'll pass you on to Seb.
Hi, I am Seb Pennar. I joined the LPO in April 2016. Before that, I was very briefly at the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, freelance before that. And here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Rundell, and I joined the orchestra in, I think, 1990. So it's a long time ago. Before that, I was 10 years at English National Opera and playing opera. And before that, I was at the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra and freelancing. And before that, I was at the Royal Opera House, where I began my career playing opera, which was good.
What year was that?
What year was that? I think it was 1972. You know, you were not thought of.
No.
Yeah.
Hugh, were you born before Kevin joined the LPO?
It depends which month you joined, Kevin. I mean,
September.
Oh no, I was. Oh yeah, I was a few months old. Yeah.
That's good.
Great. So now everyone knows who we are. We've got a few quick fire questions to ask. So I'm gonna probably direct them to somebody. So first, I'd like to ask Hugh, what made you choose the double bass?
When I was about 4 years old, I went to a baby proms of the Pink Panther with the Sydney Symphony, and you got to, as a kid, sit on the stage with the musicians, and I sat at the feet of the principal double bass, a guy called Kees Bursma, and I apparently really wanted to play the double bass after that, and my parents got me a really little one, and I learnt for a while, and then eventually I got to play in the Sydney Symphony next to Kees, and so that was a pretty cool move for me to go from the guy who was sitting above me to the guy who sat next to me.
When you were 4?
Yes, I joined Sydney.
Very quick.
Prodigy.
Yeah.
Tom, would you like to talk a little bit about your journey to LPO?
Okay, well, I suppose it started at the Guildhall. I studied with Kevin for 4 years and annoyed him so much that he put me on the extra list. So I was on the extra list for nearly 10 years or so. And then a few auditions later, I ended up with a job.
Tough crowd.
Happy ending.
You went to Junior Guildhall as well, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I was at Junior Guildhall when I was, I think I started when I was 7. I studied with Kathy Elliott. That was every Saturday, so I didn't get to play football like all the kids my age. And yeah, I did that, and I played a bit of guitar and bass guitar and things, which I still do. Yeah.
How old were you, Kevin, when you picked up the bass?
I think I was about 13. You know, it was before the time. I mean, nowadays people start when they're absurdly young, like Tom was, and they start at 6 or 7. My own son started when he was about 5, I think, on a little bass, and then. But I was 13, and my grandfather was a bass player. In fact, he was a member of the LPO. He wasn't LPO online, but he was LPO. And in the film that was broadcast recently, Battle for Music, about the LPO surviving at the outbreak of the Second World War, he's there as principal bass, which is a nice thing for me to see. He and there was always a bass in the room, in his bedroom, which we were never, as children, never allowed to go near. It was like forbidden to touch this thing. I've got two older brothers, and they passed by unscathed. But one day I was looking at it, and I was sort of figuring it out. I thought, well, it's got 4 strings, and obviously you change the note by putting your finger on the strings. I thought, can't be that hard. So I asked him, I said, can you show me how it works? You see, and that we then embarked on our first bass lesson.
Wow.
I suppose I should add as well that my dad is a bass player as well, and also my great auntie as well was the first lady bass player in the BBC Symphony Orchestra. And Laura is actually, well, I don't know if you've still got it at the moment, but you're currently playing my great auntie's bass.
Yeah, I think, oh, the French one.
Yeah.
I think that's locked up in the vaults of Festival Hall at the moment.
Where it belongs.
Seb, you started the bass fairly late, didn't you?
I think I was 14, but I played violin first, and then cello, and I skipped the viola, and I ended up with a bass. Yeah, when I was 14. I think they didn't have like many youth orchestras, or they didn't have enough bass players, and I think they figured I was quite tall and I already played two string instruments, so the county put a bass in my hands and sort of let me get on with it by myself for a little bit, and then I started having lessons, and the rest is history, I guess.
Great.
Yeah.
So does that mean I was the latest? I think I was 16 when I started the bass.
Oh.
Yeah, I was the latest. I played violin and piano first, and then I think it was literally just the one lad that played bass in my school was leaving to go to sixth form college, so I picked it up, and then I met Richard Lewis a year later, who used to work in this orchestra, and then he started teaching me, and I think he inspired me to carry on with it. And then I'd studied with Kevin for my masters, and I travelled down from Wrexham, didn't I, because I was living in Wrexham the year before my masters, and I'd get the train down to London twice a month or something. And I think once I turned up a week early for a lesson. You not
there.
Well, you were there, but you were teaching somebody else, but luckily they very kindly let me have their slot. So does anyone have a particularly memorable LPO moment, whether that's to do with a particular conductor or a particular piece or particular
I suppose I was thinking about this, and I think I remember my first getting asked my first gig. That's probably the most memorable, because I think I was in my second year at the Guildhall, and it was Christmas, and my mum was insisting that we went into town, and I had to sort out my bank stuff or something. Yeah, and she was getting very cross with me because I've been really disorganised before it, and then we got in the car going down to town, and I said, "Oh, I've got to go back. I've got a gig." She goes, "It's going to have to wait. I have to sort this bank stuff out today." I said, "It's from the LPO." And immediately just went. I had to quickly find some tails and get into the Barbican for a 7:30 start.
Do you remember what you were playing?
Yeah, Dvorak 9, Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with David Garrett. I can't think.
The classic program, isn't it?
Classic.
Yeah, it's very good. I like it. I have to explain. Dvorak 9 is probably the most popular piece in the entire repertoire. you know, if you don't know what you're playing, it's probably going to be Dvorak 9.
Lots of people have been asking about what life's like as an orchestral musician, and I suppose as a bass player, a lot of the stuff we deal with can sometimes be to do with the size of the instrument. I think I speak for most bass players around that, like, we've all definitely been asked if we wish we played the flute, or oh, that's a big guitar, and stuff like that. So a lot of questions I've got here are kind of to do with how the logistics of actually owning a bass and how we move it around.
As a member of the orchestra, or when you're working with the orchestra, we have a team of people to help us. So the boxes turn up. If we've had to bring an instrument, we put the instrument in the box and it magically appears at the next venue. And if we're lucky enough to have an instrument there already, we just have to get ourselves to the venue. So I think in many ways we have an easy time. I think that over my life, the thought of carrying a bass has got harder and harder. I mentioned I was at ENO for 10 years, and in those days you could drive, if the performance was starting at 7:30, you could drive up at 7 o'clock, park on the Strand or Trafalgar Square or somewhere, and you could just, and then you were there at the theatre, at the Coliseum. Nowadays, it's a huge problem to take a bass anywhere, and the congestion charge has just gone up to £15 a day if you drive into any central venue, if you drive to the festival hall. So I think things have got harder and harder with that.
There's definitely certain times where it's like more fun to take your bass on a tube, like on a Friday night after there's loads of drunk people, everyone wants to talk to you, but they're so funny. Or rush hour, the worst time, like absolutely the worst time to take a bass on a tube.
Yes, because they're quite delicate. They look big and strong, but they're very delicate, and you only got to have people pushing into you, or they can do a lot of damage. Which
they do. People try and jump over it and like shove it out of the way and stuff. It's so stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, people. Sorry, Hugh. Go on.
I was just going to say, there's hardly anyone to fix them in the UK. It's really difficult to, if something happens to your instrument, and for a long time, when I joined the orchestra for the first couple of years, I only had that one instrument, and it got damaged, and I had to send it off to France to get it fixed, and it took about 6 or 9 months to get it back. It's really annoying when something goes wrong, and most of us own really old instruments, a couple of 100 years old, and there are cracks that happen, and they're very delicate. The ribs are so thin that you just need to, I don't know, for someone to kick it with their, just, graze it, and you can smash the rib in. It's so annoying. They're actually really delicate.
Just before the lockdown, my bass was damaged around this sort of area, because it's, as Hugh was saying, it's so thin around there, and it was just from leaving it on in somewhere I could see it on the train, and I think someone must have, I don't know, just like put a bit of luggage on it or something really innocuous, but I put a crack in it. But luckily it got fixed just before the lockdown. So,
but they are very delicate. I mean, mine's been damaged in transit in a hard case. I'm sure everyone here's probably had damage even from being transported in a hard case.
When I first came to the LPO, I think it was for my audition, I brought it over on a plane from Australia, and one of the tuning pegs that you use to change the tune up the instrument just got snapped off. I mean, it was made of brass and cast brass, so you can't fix that. And so I had to kind of tune it with a pair of pliers before doing my audition, and
still got the job. But you were putting your bass on a hold on a plane is so stressful. Like, at least when you're traveling with an orchestra, like a big symphony orchestra, we have our own kind of cargo kind of container, don't we? That all the instruments go in and everything's safe, and we've got specialist people to look after them. And then when you're traveling on your own with a bass or in a chamber orchestra, and you have to like take it, I don't know, you get to like terminal 5 and have to take it to a specific desk, and depending on the person that's working there, sometimes they don't even know that you can take a bass on. And then particularly I've noticed, like, not necessarily in the UK, but I can't remember where I was, in Bucharest, and I had my bass, and it wasn't even mine. It was I borrowed somebody else's because I was nervous about taking mine on, because it gets damaged so easily. And like I handed it over to the customs people, were like, they have to put it through this big X-ray machine. I was like, can you please make sure someone's at the other end so it doesn't fall on the floor, because they wouldn't let me through there. And they're like, yes. And I'm standing there watching it, and like no one stood there, so the thing just went straight on the floor. I mean, luckily it was like a pretty solid instrument, and it was fine. But if that had been a different instrument, that could have been catastrophic. So
I got to LAX one time, and they wanted to inspect, the TSA wanted to inspect my bass, and so I said, I'll open it for you. He said, no, you can't touch it, we'll open it. And so they open the hard case, and they say, what is this? I say, again, it's a double bass, it's a musical instrument. And they say, what's inside it? I said, nothing, it's a hollow wooden box. You can have a look in the holes on the front. And this guy said, we're going to have to open it up. And I said, you can't open it up. It's 200 years old. You can't just open up. And they say, we have to look inside. And I was going, no. This guy comes in with a crowbar. And I thought, this is game over, this is going to absolutely destroy me. And then this other person happened to walk in, this really big guy with a big afro, and he goes, hey man, that's a double bass, do you play? I said, yeah. And he goes, oh man, that's just a musical instrument, you can't open that. And the guy said, oh, okay. And that was that.
Imagine if you hadn't walked in. Oh. Should we have another question?
Yes.
Okay. What's it like coming and caring for a bass? I guess we've kind of covered this already. I mean, I don't know. It's difficult with playing a massive wooden instrument, isn't it? Because it's so affected by the temperature and humidity. So it's quite. I mean, Hugh, we have these little damp pits, don't we, that we put in our basses. And like, you've got 2 of them, haven't you? I just like constantly see you going to like wet these damp pits and put them in your bass all the time, especially in the winter.
I'm so sick of getting my bass repaired, and it's because all the glue that holds our basses together is hide glue, which is water activated, which means when it all dries out, it doesn't stick anymore. And because I had a lot of repair work done on my instrument, I just decided that I had to keep it moist so it didn't just fall apart when the air dries out.
They're quite. I was going to say they're quite sort of capricious in that they, some days your bass will just not work. Like it'll just be like,
temperamental.
I'm not going to sound nice today, and then other days.
Good excuse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Even like little changes, I've noticed in this house that if I keep my bass downstairs with all the other instruments, I can get a terrible buzz on certain notes because it's quite dry. But then if I take it upstairs, I don't get that. So I've just been storing my bass in my room for the last couple of weeks, and it sounds great. But it means I've got a small room, but I've now got hundreds of instruments in there.
Yeah, I had the same thing. That the room that I've got the bass in faces south, and it's got a big window. And the weather's been so good, so much sun, that it dried out a lot. And then one day I started playing it. I mean, like every note buzzed, every harmonic.
Oh God!
It's like the buzz was so much louder than the F sharp harmonic. It's ridiculous. So all I've done with that, I put a couple of bowls of water, and when I lie it down, it took one day. I lay it down next to some bowls of water, and the buzzes all went away. And it actually sounds really good because it's very dry in there. Whereas if it's damp, if things get damp, it sounds a bit cloggy. It's not very nice.
Haven't you famously, don't you sometimes pour a glass of water down your bass when you've got a big buzz before?
Yeah, I did that.
I've seen you do that.
Yeah. It's not a whole glass of water. It's just damping a cloth and putting it on the putting it on the front. And I've been told not to do that, but it makes the buzz go away. Buzzes don't like water.
I think one of the great things about touring is just all the different concert halls. I mean, there's so many absolutely amazing concert halls when we go on tour that just have these really great acoustics. Does anyone have a particularly favourite hall that they like to play in?
Suntory Hall, I think, in
Germany. Yeah, that's fun.
Typical. The one place I haven't been.
Oh,
it was amazing, Tom.
Tom didn't get much for that tour.
It's a great hall, and it looks nice as well. It's sort of I don't know how old it is, but it's sort of timeless.
I like some of the smaller ones. I like the Graf Zeppelin house in Friedrichshafen. That I always have to
Really?
to Friedrichshafen. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I really liked the Lincoln Center. I thought it was so loud on that stage. I don't know what it sounded like out from the audience. But
Yeah, but have you played at Carnegie Hall?
Yeah.
I think Carnegie Hall is a great hall.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful sound on that. And it makes such a difference to how we sound if we're in a hall that gives something. And the classic halls like the Musikverein in Vienna and Carnegie Hall, they are absolutely wonderful musical instruments, which we relish when we're there. They're beauties.
I was going to ask if anyone's had any funny stories or myths on tour. I know Tom's had a couple. If there was anything that you wanted to share with us.
Well, I suppose. One of the things we like to do on tour is, particularly in Germany, is we like to go to the spas. You know, relax before a concert, and these German spas are amazing. We go as a bass section. We're going to sit in some saunas and go and swim in some pools. But this one place in Munich near the what's it? Well, the Gasteig or the Gasteig in Munich. Right opposite the hall is the state baths.
The Volksbad.
The Volksbad, yeah.
Volksbad.
Volksbad, and it's a small place, a couple of saunas and a couple of pools. And Seb and Hugh and I think we got a bus and we had quite a limited time before the concert. We thought, well, let's go to the spa. So we walked quite a long time from the hotel to get to the spa, and then immediately got into this unbelievably hot sauna. And we were in there for about 10 minutes or so, and you know, it's so hot you think you're going to die. And then I came out, and Seb and I we need to go and have a cold swim.
The floor was like, we kind of had to like make a path out of towels. It was too hot to put our feet on the floor. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and then we decided to go to the pool around the corner, and jumped in, and I decided to dive in and then swim around the bottom for a bit, just showing off. And then I came up to the surface, and I couldn't breathe, and I just couldn't catch my breath, and I was looking at Seb, just going, "Help! Help!" And he just didn't know. He just didn't know what to do. You're absolutely useless. You're panicking and floating in 3 meter deep pool, and he's just going, "What?" It turns out it was what's called a laryngospasm, so where your vocal cords think you're drowning, and they close up as to not let any water in, and it's just a natural reaction that the body does. But eventually, after a couple of minutes, they do loosen up, and you can breathe again normally, and there's nothing bad that can happen from it.
You see, so I knew that, so that's why I was
yeah.
let you get on with it.
At the time, I couldn't breathe, and I was just floating there, going, "Someone help me!" Anyway, so that has become an ongoing joke. If I'm ever trying to get Seb's attention in the orchestra, I'll go, "Yeah." Sure enough, he'll avoid me.
And now we all know not to rely on Seb if we're ever in any
Hey,
way.
I kept a cool head in all that, so I think
Seb wasn't worried.
I'm exactly the sort of person you want in an emergency, I would argue, but you know.
Oh, dear. Shall we talk a little bit about bass repertoire?
Oh, let's.
Prokofiev often writes a bass solo. I think the most noticeable one is the solo from Lieutenant Kijé, which is a nice tune to play. Shostakovich has some. Shostakovich 15 Symphony has got a bass solo. At the end of an agonizingly long and difficult cello solo, the bass gets about 15 notes, but it is very lonely, so because there's not much else going on in that. There are quite a few solos in the operatic repertoire. I think probably the most well-known one is from Verdi's Rigoletto, where there's a bass and cello in octaves, on a good night in octaves, playing with a singer on stage. And there's the very famous one for all the basses, which is from Otello, in the last act of Otello, just as he comes on to murder his innocent wife. Verdi had the master stroke of giving the double basses, a medley of themes from the opera, which I think works very well. It's quite an innovation in those days. There's an interesting one in harmonics, right at the beginning of Ravel's opera L'Enfant et le Sortilège, which is just for 2 oboes and a solo double bass. And he purposely writes harmonics that are going to sound out of tune, because he's using natural harmonics, and he uses a lot of thirds and sevenths, which are not pure notes. They don't sound in tune. And I think he's purposely writing that. So, and the oboes, in fact, don't sound terribly well in tune before that, in my opinion. But the bass certainly undermines them very, very well. Really comes in. Yeah.
What's the hardest solo you've ever had to play?
I think that one, actually, because it starts on a note way up the D string, and it's very hard to pitch the first note. And if you start a note on a note that's a tone lower or higher, then you really are in trouble, because everything else just, you never recover. So that's quite tricky.
I think you once said to me that one of the things that's difficult about that was something happens on stage that makes everyone laugh. So when you're doing this, when you finish this really difficult solo, everyone in the audience laughs.
That's right. Everybody laughs. Yes. Yeah. And that's also true of the Pulcinella. So there's a solo in Pulcinella with the duet between double bass and trombone. And at the end of that, if you've played it well and you really nailed it, when it finishes, the audience laugh. that's the sort of the accolade you get for having performed well. Of course, there's the very famous ragtime bass player by Adolf Lotter, which Seb is a great proponent of. Is that on YouTube?
No.
Okay.
It should be. It should be.
That was very good. Seb recorded that last week at home.
Wait, you've also done a recording of that.
Yeah, isn't it?
The world premiere of Adolf Lotter? I think that maybe.
Has anyone else recorded it?
I recorded it commercially.
Is that where is that available?
I don't know. It's a LP or
Is it
something.
on reel to reel?
It's
Yeah, on that must be massive.
it was a wax disc. It sort of sounds going on around it. Yeah.
I suppose something that's quite unique to our instrument compared to others is that there is a lot less repertoire for the bass than there is for violin, flute, even the viola. We have a lot less to play with, I think, mainly because our instrument, I don't know,
that doesn't stop us though. So you think we tend to play all the Bach cello suites, which Hugh has just recorded a very nice one of his seconds.
Yeah.
second prelude, which is probably available on the LPO Facebook if you look there.
This weekend.
But we're always, stealing other instruments' music and trying to play it on the bass. For instance, for my final recital, I played the Shostakovich cello sonata and the Beethoven Spring Sonata. The Shostakovich was at pitch, and the Beethoven was down an octave.
What number is the Spring Sonata? What is that?
Yeah.
Right.
That was nice.
Thank you.
That's what bass players do these days, isn't it? They're always trying to push the technique of the instrument so far.
Big change over my life is that when I was studying, you were, if you dared to set foot out of double bass repertoire, which was basically Dittersdorf or Dragonetti or Kusevitsky, then everyone ridiculed you if you went beyond those. But that's completely changed now, where people play anything. It makes teaching very difficult because you don't know what they're going to bring.
Hugh, perhaps you could talk to us a bit about classical versus jazz bass. Have you got any experience with the two?
I grew up when I started learning what you might call classical double bass, simple tunes like London Bridge is Falling Down and things like that from my first teacher, Chris Belshaw, from when I was about 7 until 12. And when I got to high school, I started playing jazz almost exclusively. I kept on doing a little bit of technique stuff with my teacher, Alex Henry, who was the principal of Sydney Symphony, still is. But a lot of what I did was jazz. And what I did with Alex when I was learning double bass was a lot of stuff like Bach, which actually to me, it's a lot of the chordal stuff, the harmonies that go on behind Bach, very similar to jazz. And a lot of the music that we play, I would say that jazz harmony kind of stopped after Bach for a couple of hundred years until maybe, for me, the early 20th century when it came back into classical music. And I think you can hear a lot of that, even in things like Dvorak symphonies, like Dvorak 9, which we were talking about earlier. So there is a lot of jazz in classical and vice versa. One of the main differences for playing bass is that you're playing pizzicato, you're plucking the strings when you're doing jazz, and also there's some improvisation involved. You're often given a chord chart and a simple melody, and then you just make it up as you go. And that creativity is great. It's almost endless. But with classical music, we're almost always just reading music when we're playing an orchestra. And although we're trying to we recreate the piece in a different way every time, the conductor gives us different ideas, and we all have our own musical ideas. So you'll never hear the orchestra play something and it'll sound the same twice. But nonetheless, we are following more of a script, I would say, when we do classical music.
Well, going back to the thing you said about the bow and the pits stuff, I suppose because we spend most of our time playing with a bow, that if we do have to do some jazz stuff, you've got to have a callus on your finger built up, otherwise you get terrible blisters. So it's quite difficult to be a classical player and a jazz player full time, because you've got to have the ability on the bow, but also really, really thick calluses on your fingers. Otherwise, you just get blisters and can't play.
I've never really touched and gone into jazz at all on the bass. Never, I suppose, had the opportunity because I started quite late, and then went to university rather than music college before that and stuff. So but I've definitely found like bass is like quite a weird instrument that people just assume that because you're a bass player and you're a classical bass player, they assume that you can play jazz music as well, which I can't. So the thought of having like somebody, I don't know, shove a chord sheet in front of me would really get my nerves going, I think, because I've got absolutely no clue when it comes to that.
Even before you start thinking about reading chord charts and jazz harmony, there's the way that classical players play and the way that jazz players play. There's like the difference in the kind of rhythmic concept. Whereas, because we're sitting at the back of an orchestra, we're quite far away from everyone else, so we tend to play quite ahead of the beat to match up with everyone around you. Whereas in the jazz context, players tend to play slightly behind the beat to let it have that kind of lazy, relaxed feel. So that's something I find really difficult if I'm going between classical and jazz, is trying to think of the way that my brain hears where 1, 2, 3, and 4 are. In the orchestra, it would be slightly ahead, and with a jazz context, slightly behind. It's quite difficult to do.
And I know one of the times when I'm out of my comfort zone is when there's something which is clearly jazz inspired put on the page, and it's I know what they want it to sound like, and it's not going to sound like that because the instrument that I'm playing on is entirely geared for playing Beethoven, Mahler, Bruckner, Strauss, and the setup is different. And the jazz players have amplification, and they have different strings which have much more reverberation on them. So you're already very much disadvantaged by the instrument. You're actually playing the wrong instrument.
And quite often the strings are quite far off the fingerboard with classical players as well.
Yeah.
Which means we can dig in and get a really loud sound. Whereas with the jazz stuff, I like to have the strings quite close to the fingerboard, so you don't have to dig in so much to get a loud sound. And that can be very difficult playing jazz on an instrument where the strings are very high.
We often adjust the string height, don't we? A lot of people have winders on the bridge, so your bridge, which is made of wood and which of course holds the strings off the fingerboard, they can have some metal or wooden winders in it, so you can adjust the height for whatever you're doing, whether it's jazz or orchestral or or solo repertoire, which gives it. That's the only instrument I can think of in the orchestra where you have such a level of adjustment that you can make day to day if you feel like it.
Seb, would you like to tell us who your favourite composer is to play, or orchestral works that particularly highlight the bass?
Okay. Personal favourites would have to be, unsurprisingly, not Donizetti, Kevin. Mahler and Richard Strauss. The stuff that Strauss gets you to do in his operas and his tone poems are quite sort of athletic, or it gets you all over the bass, and sometimes gives you the tune. Like Heldenleben's got a lot for you to do, and Don Juan and Till Eulenspiegel, they're all sort of difficult but doable, and quite satisfying when they come off, if they come off.
I think we have to move on to some audience questions now. So let's start. The first one I've got here is the bass section's usually sat on the left side of the stage behind the cellos, but occasionally we sit behind the violins on the right, or behind the rest of the orchestra in a line at the back of the stage. So how does this affect our playing? And do we have to alter the way that we play, or focus our attention differently?
Yes, I mean, I think obviously if we're sitting behind the first violins, we're hearing totally different information and sometimes we'll be playing a piece that we've never played in that position, and that we've only played sitting behind the cellos or violas on the right of the orchestra. And you're just receiving different information. So you have to, it sometimes makes things very difficult because it's not what we're used to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the back of the orchestra, I think we have to play very, very promptly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally quite like sitting in a line at the back. And I don't know whether that's because I'm quite used to sitting further back in a section where you have a lot less contact with the rest of the orchestra. And then I feel like when we're in a line, I love it because you can see, you can see the whole section, And I love being so close to the woodwinds as well, and then the brassy, the side or whatever. That's definitely one of my favourite spots. Although we don't really sit there that often, and it does bring its own challenges as a section.
But when we do sit along the back, we have that wall behind us as well, and something about having the wall behind us makes all the kind of it makes all the basses resonate a lot, maybe a lot clearer.
Okay, so our next question, somebody's asked, where should they go if they want to listen to the best solo?
Well, I gather Kevin Rundell's recording of Adolf Lotter's ragtime bass player is available somewhere.
There's also the London double bass sound featuring Kevin Rundell.
Yeah.
That's an excellent. Yeah, that was Carla Records. Jeffrey Simon conducting a great selection of double bass players.
Some big names in there.
Yeah,
featuring
repertoire,
such as Spice Girls Wannabe.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is a classic.
Yeah.
I think before anyone starts looking for that, they should make sure they go to the LPO Facebook page and scroll down until they see the video of us playing the last movement of Mahler 9. Because frankly, it's unacceptable that the violas have got more views than we have.
Oh no!
So.
Oh yeah, please view our video.
Yeah. So if everyone watching this, after you finish watching this interview, scroll down on the page, watch the Mahler 9 video,
and tell your friends.
Very happy. Tell your friends. Tell your friends
as well.
And then watch Hugh's video, which is going to be released this weekend. That's some lovely bass solo repertoire, which obviously was written for the cello first, but he's done a really good rendition of it. Anywhere else?
You could also, one of the biggest, the Paganini of the double bass, as they call him, is a guy called Giovanni Bottassini.
Hey!
And, there we go. And he probably wrote the most repertoire for the double bass out of anyone. And it's kind of parlor music, but there's also some really beautiful operatic melodies that he's done, different parts of operas, which he's orchestrated for bass, transcribed. And you can just look on YouTube for Bottassini, and you'll find some really beautiful pieces on there.
Did you have a question about stools?
There is a question about stools. Somebody said, I'm curious about the bass player's stools. Do you have your own that you carry with you? Or do you just use... I haven't finished. Or do you just use whatever ones are already at each concert venue? Maybe they have to be exactly the right height, ?
Okay, so look, so the LPO have provided us with our own stools that George has specially cut to the correct height using a special tool that he has. Anyone know what tool that is?
It's a plumber's tool for cutting pipe. It's a pipe cutter.
So speaking from my own experience, I don't drive, so I'm always using the train to cart my bass around. So I usually don't carry my own stool, and sometimes I've had to do concerts in like churches and cathedrals, and I've had to sort of rely on the warden or whoever's there to sort of find me something. And sometimes I've had to make do with like a chamber organ stool, which is sort of about that thin, but as wide as the sofa that I'm sat on, and it can look quite ridiculous. But
just the thought of that really stresses me out. Like I always take my own stool more often than not, unless it's an orchestra that I've worked with before and I know that they've got like decent stools around. I just couldn't turn up somewhere without a stool. Like I couldn't turn up to a gig in a church and not take my own stool. I would just be so stressed about it.
There's usually something, you know.
But what happens if
I've sat on tables before. I've sat on the back of plastic, school chairs that kind of fold underneath you, and I've snapped one of them before in a gig. Anything not to carry a stool, I'll sit on it. It doesn't matter. I'll sacrifice.
I'm completely the opposite of that. I've sat on this stool for the last 15 years, and I don't like sitting on any other stools because I've made a really nice bum groove in it. So I have to have it exactly the same way round each time. Kind of at a diamond shape and pointing towards the conductor.
Did you want to?
Exactly then.
Did you want to show a sort of close up of that groove, or?
Groove, yeah.
I don't. You can't see it, but it's definitely in
Feel
there.
it.
But the only thing that's changed about this Stool in about 15 years is I've reupholstered it, but it's the same foam.
Nice job.
So,
Lovely
thank
stuff.
you.
Yeah, nice job.
Thanks, Mum. Thanks, Mum.
Yeah.
And of course, there is a bass player that makes stools, isn't there?
Who's that?
There is. My boyfriend bought one, and when I was in Liverpool, we had how many? Six stools made by Dave Johnson, and they were really good. They're really brilliant stools. I need to get one because my one that I've been playing on's a bit kaput. It's an Amadeus one. We've got another question here about people have seen violin and cello players break strings on the platform in Festival Hall, and has that ever happened to any of us? Do we carry spares? I mean, I've never had a string snap. Has anybody?
It's never happened to me, but I went to see the New York Phil at the Barbican 6 years ago, and Tim Cobb was a principal bass, and they were playing Mile of Nine, and just before there's a little bass solo, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah.
Just before that, his A string just snapped, so the person next to him just handed him a bass, and then Tim's bass got slowly passed down until it was at the back of the section, so everyone's kind of bases moved up. But that was very unusual. I've never seen a bass string snap on stage until then.
I did that on one of my first gigs with the LPO when we were in Japan. Great tour, and
I wasn't there, so I wouldn't.
You weren't there. It was a great tour.
It was great.
I was playing on a borrowed instrument, and I think I'd put one of your strings on, Kevin, hadn't I? You'd somehow lent me a bottom string, and our bottom string often goes through this extension, which is this little bit of extra wood that helps us play a few notes lower. And this was a really bad extension, and it kind of got caught in there. And so we're tuning up to play the overture, getting ready, and I'm twisting it, trying to make it sharper, trying to make the pitch go high, and it's not moving anywhere. I was kind of playing with it and trying to get it, and then suddenly the string just snapped. Obviously it got caught somewhere. And so that was that. And so I had to just walk off stage right before the concert started and find another bass string somewhere, which, yeah, was a bad start to the concert.
I once had a tailpiece wire go. Has that happened to anyone? So that's the bit that goes underneath, it goes all the tension from the strings goes underneath and loops around the end pin. And mine broke during a rehearsal, but it did not give the cellist in front of me a shock. It meant the tailpiece came up with a tremendous force and hit the back of the chair of the cellist. And I think she thought she'd just been shot. And then, of course, the aftermath is that all the strings go floppy and the bridge falls off, and so there's a great clatter afterwards as well. But that was quite sensational, I would say. It's only never happened since, thank heavens.
Yes. There's one more question here. Is there a piece of repertoire that you especially love, not necessarily just for its bass part, and have not yet had the chance to play in a concert?
I've not really properly played Shostakovich Symphony No. 10. I have, but with a really terrible amateur orchestra, and I would love to do that properly because
it's a great piece.
Yeah.
The piece that I've been listening to a bit. I've never played Lohengrin, and it's got some fabulous music in it, but it's unlikely to be done at Glyndebourne. And even though it's got a swan gliding through a lake, I mean, they could do the first act outdoors, I suppose, and then move into the theatre. But I'd love to play that. But who knows?
I've been practicing an excerpt from Lohengrin from I think it's Act 3, Scene 3, and it's 2 pages of triplet quavers.
Yeah, I know the bit. Yeah.
It's disgusting. It's
isn't it?
Ridiculous.
Fast and loud. And it's in 12/8, isn't it?
I've got it here somewhere.
Oh.
Bye, Seb.
So Seb's now going to play 2 pages.
That's what the bass is there for, right?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Whoa.
That's the bit, yeah. Yeah. It's 1 page.
Lots of notes.
Can't wait
I'm
to hear
ashamed,
that.
I'm ashamed to say I don't know the piece, but I do know the Stan Kenton version, which is like a Cuban jazz version of Lohengrin. It's well worth checking. It's on Spotify. It's well worth checking out. The
I'd like to hear that, yeah.
Stan Kenton Lohengrin overture.
Okay. Cool. Well, really lovely to chat to you all today. I hope that you all enjoyed getting to know the bass section a little bit better. And if you want to find out a bit more about the orchestra, please visit our website. That's lpo.org.uk. And of course, we would really love to hear from you. So do get in touch with us on social media using the hashtag LPOnline. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.